Fame often hides what happens behind closed doors, and few stories show that better than the life of Jerry Lewis. To the public, he was an icon. Funny, brilliant, larger than life, but for his family, things were far more complicated. His son Anthony lived through years of unpredictability, emotional scars, and painful distance from the man the world adored. For a long time, he said nothing. But now, 7 years after Jerry's passing, Anthony Lewis is ready to speak, and his truth paints a very different picture of the comedy legend. The mystery behind Jerry Lewis's birth. Jerry Lewis's beginnings have always carried a bit of mystery, with conflicting accounts clouding the details of his early life. What is certain is that he was born on March 16, 1926, to Jewish immigrant parents. His father, Daniel "Danny" Levitch, arrived in New York from the Russian Empire, while his mother, Rachel "Ray" Levitch, came from Warsaw. Beyond those facts, the story grows less clear. Lewis himself claimed his birth name was Joseph, though many early records list him as Jerome. Even the hospital where he was born remains uncertain. Whether this confusion came from fading memories or from Lewis shaping his own story to soften the realities of growing up Jewish in a time of deep prejudice, the truth may never be fully known. With parents steeped in performance, it seemed almost inevitable that Lewis would follow the same path. His father was a vaudeville entertainer, and his mother worked as a pianist for a local radio station. From an early age, Lewis displayed a mischievous sense of humor. As a teenager, he became known for pulling pranks and stirring up harmless trouble, the same playful energy that would later shape his career. His first foray into entertainment came with a clever gimmick called the record act. In it, Lewis pantomimed a performance while a record played off stage. By the age of 15, he had perfected the routine and landed a spot in Buffalo at a burlesque house. But the act flopped, leaving him without bookings and forcing him to look elsewhere for work. He bounced between jobs, selling sodas and working as an usher in New York theaters, all while nursing the dream of making it on stage. That dream was reignited when Lewis reconnected with Max Coleman, an old vaudeville colleague of his father's, who encouraged him to try again. Soon, Lewis found himself performing in the Catskills' famed Borscht Belt, a hub of entertainment for Jewish families. There, he caught the attention of Irving Kay, who would later become his manager. His solo career brought him modest success, but the real breakthrough was still ahead. Unlike many young men of his generation, Lewis avoided wartime service due to a heart murmur, and this twist of fate set him on a very different course. In that time, he met Patty Palmer, a singer who had worked with Jimmy Dorsey's orchestra. The two fell in love and married on October 3, 1944. They went on to raise a large family, with 5 biological children during the 1950s and an adopted son in 1949. To outsiders, the marriage appeared ideal, but as Lewis's star began to rise, life at home became more complicated. When they first wed, he was just another young entertainer working the circuit. But only a year later, in 1945, everything shifted. While performing at the Glass Hat Club in New York City, the 19-year-old Lewis crossed paths with a 27-year-old singer named Dean Martin. Neither man could have imagined that their meeting would ignite one of the most legendary partnerships in show business history. The friendship that built a Hollywood empire. Jerry Lewis first crossed paths with Dean Martin in 1945, when both were booked separately at a small New York City club called the Glass Hat. Lewis, still carving out his place in comedy, was performing a quirky lip-sync routine, while Martin crooned with his smooth voice and effortless charm. Lewis was struck immediately by Martin's style. He had that cool, laid-back swagger that made him stand out. Not long after, fate placed them on the same bill again. This time at the Havana Madrid nightclub, Lewis watched Martin perform once more, just as captivated as before. After the show, he decided to introduce himself. The two hit it off right away, staying long after closing time, trading jokes and fooling around with ideas that could one day work as a comedy act. It was the start of something neither of them could have predicted. Their real break as a team came a short time later in Atlantic City. A performer dropped out of a show at the 500 Club, and Lewis convinced the manager to let Martin take the open spot. Martin did his usual set of songs, but then joined Lewis on stage to try out some of the bits they had been tossing around. The crowd erupted with laughter. In that moment, both men knew they had stumbled onto a winning formula. Martin would play the unshakably cool, straight man who sang with ease, while Lewis leaned fully into his role as the wild, unpredictable clown. Lewis himself later described their partnership as a mix of sexy and slapstick. From there, the duo took New York by storm. They performed across the city, eventually landing a residency at the famous Copacabana, which put them firmly on the map. Their stage success quickly opened doors in other arenas. They cracked into radio, which then led to television, each platform feeding the other. In 1948, they appeared on the very first episode of The Ed Sullivan Show, though at the time, it was known as Toast of the Town. A year later, NBC handed them their own radio show, which ran until 1953. But it was Hollywood that made Martin and Lewis legends. With the momentum of their stage, radio, and television triumphs, they signed a movie deal that turned them into box office giants. Over the next decade, they starred in 17 films, including titles like My Friend Irma, At War with the Army, That's My Boy, Jumping Jack, and Money from Models. The films followed a familiar pattern. Martin and Lewis played best friends torn apart, usually because of Martin's womanizing character. By the end, the two always found their way back to each other, with friendship winning out over everything else. It was a formula audiences never seemed to tire of. Film after film, Martin and Lewis delivered, cementing their place as one of the most iconic comedy duos of all time. So where did things fall apart for this legendary duo? On the surface, it seemed like Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis had every reason to keep their friendship and partnership strong. They were wildly successful, adored by audiences, and had Hollywood in the palm of their hands. But success often brings bigger dreams. And for Jerry Lewis, being one half of a comedy act wasn't enough. He wanted more. He wanted to write, direct, and shape the kind of films that would cement him as a major force in Hollywood. That ambition slowly began to shift the balance between them. Lewis wasn't content just being the goofy, slapstick half of the act. He wanted his characters to have more depth, to be funny, but also human, someone the audience could truly feel for. He even coined a term for them, the lovable schnook. It was his way of making sure his characters were not just clowns, but people with heart. In theory, this change could have worked beautifully for the duo. Dean Martin usually played the smooth, detached character who eventually softened thanks to Lewis's antics. If Lewis's roles became more layered, it should have only made Martin's on-screen journey even more impactful. But the problem was that Dean was growing restless too. He was tired of playing the same one-note roles, tired of being the straight man who only changed in the final act. He wanted more variety, more heart for his own characters. With Lewis now staking out that territory, Martin felt boxed in. Creative tension wasn't the only crack in their bond. Dean's solo singing career was gaining momentum, and he wanted more opportunities to showcase it in their films. Jerry, focused on building his own style of comedy, didn't share that vision. The more Lewis pushed for creative control, the more it felt like the films were no longer Martin and Lewis productions. They were Jerry Lewis movies with Dean Martin along for the ride. By the mid-1950s, Martin had reached his breaking point. He grew frustrated with the way their characters were written, and he bristled at what he saw as Lewis's excessive ambition. To outsiders, it looked like professional jealousy, but Martin himself dismissed that idea. He insisted it was Lewis's need to dominate their work that ultimately drove a wedge between them. The end came quietly, but painfully. On Tuesday, July 24, 1956, Jerry Lewis walked down the hall to Dean Martin's room before their final performance together. He only wanted some ice, but the moment carried more weight than either man admitted out loud. They exchanged good wishes for the show, and Lewis walked away, feeling a deep sense of loss. Years later, he would write that he felt like he was losing his best friend and couldn't understand why. The next night, July 25, 1956, marked their final show at the Copacabana, exactly 10 years to the day from their very first appearance together. Unlike other partnerships that might cool off but still leave room for the occasional reunion, Martin and Lewis never really reconnected. Their pride and stubbornness built a wall neither was willing to climb. In the end, The same qualities that made them so magnetic as a duo also made reconciliation impossible. The late-night show that self-destructed. In 1962, just 2 weeks before The Jerry Lewis Show came to life, Jerry Lewis had a short but unforgettable stint as a guest host on The Tonight Show. To understand how big that was, it helps to know the weight The Tonight Show already carried. Launched in 1954 with Steve Allen, the program had essentially created the late-night talk show format. After Allen's departure in 1957, Jack Paar took over, hosting until 1962. Then came the transition that would cement the show's legacy, Johnny Carson stepping in and holding the desk for an astounding 3 decades. But in that small window of time between Parr's exit and Carson's arrival, guest hosts filled the seat, and one of them was Jerry Lewis. His episodes pulled in massive ratings, enough to spark a frenzy among television executives eager to give him his own platform. Back then, The Tonight Show was the only late-night talk show on television. Competing against it was no small challenge, but Lewis suddenly looked like the perfect candidate to lead a rival. According to accounts from Cliff Nesteroff's book, The Comedians, all 3 major networks, ABC, CBS, and even NBC, tried to sign him. ABC won the battle, but at a staggering cost. They gave Lewis everything he asked for, agreeing to a weekly 2-hour Saturday night show. The deal promised $8 million a season for 42 episodes, with a 5-season option that would raise his salary even higher. For the early 1960s, this was an astronomical sum. Money wasn't the only thing Lewis demanded. He wanted full creative control, and ABC handed it to him without hesitation. That control began with the very place the show would be filmed. Instead of using an existing studio, Lewis insisted ABC purchase the El Capitan Theater in Los Angeles and transform it into his personal television palace. The renovations were extravagant, covering the essentials: cameras, a control room, proper lighting, but also indulging in lavish extras like custom drapes, red carpets, and a grand dressing room fit for a star. In the end, the entire building was renamed the Jerry Lewis Theater. Once the show was underway, Lewis's approach to creative control turned out to be even more intense than executives expected. He often gave little clarity on what the show's actual format would be, keeping even the most basic details vague. And in a move that showcased just how much authority he wielded, he had a special switching system installed that allowed him to override the director and control live camera shots himself from behind his own desk. On September 21, 1963, The Jerry Lewis Show made its debut on ABC. This was meant to be the network's bold move into late-night television, a direct challenge to NBC's Tonight Show. With a household name like Jerry Lewis leading the charge, expectations couldn't have been higher. But instead of making history, the show quickly became remembered for all the wrong reasons. The premiere episode was packed with star power. Comedian Mort Sahl, singers Kay Stevens and Jack Jones, and writer Clifton Fadiman were all on the bill. To top it off, surprise guests included television pioneer Steve Allen, the legendary Jimmy Durante, and actor Robert Stack. On paper, it had everything needed to succeed, but when the cameras rolled, the night unraveled fast. Technical problems plagued the production, and critics wasted no time tearing it apart. The 2-hour runtime, in particular, was brutal for audiences. Time magazine delivered one of the harshest verdicts, mocking ABC for believing that millions of viewers wanted to watch 2 hours of what they called the unscripted ramblings of an egocentric bore. The criticism was relentless, and the public agreed. Behind the scenes, panic spread through ABC. The show was losing viewers week after week, and it was clear to everyone, from the crew to executives in the boardroom, that the experiment was a failure. By Thanksgiving of 1963, just 2 months after the debut, ABC pulled the plug. The decision cost them dearly, as the network had to pay out Lewis's contract despite promising multiple seasons and more than 40 episodes a year. In reality, the show only lasted 13 weeks, ending with its final broadcast on December 21, 1963. When the new year rolled around, ABC scrambled to fill the gaping hole left in its schedule. The Hollywood Palace, a hastily assembled variety show, stepped into the first hour of the time slot, while the second hour was handed over to affiliates for local programming. Unlike its predecessor, the Hollywood Palace found its footing and went on to run for 6 years, proving that one network's disaster could quickly turn into another opportunity. Jerry Lewis's secret struggle with darkness. Jerry Lewis lived with a relentless need for perfection, always pushing himself to elevate his comedy. That drive sometimes paid off on stage, but behind the curtain, it came with heavy consequences. His quirks were well known. He refused to wear a pair of socks more than once, and he kept his money folded in neat stacks, ordered by serial number, tucked into his pocket. That same obsession with impressing his audience led to the accident that changed everything. In 1965, during a performance, Jerry attempted a double cartwheel off a piano. Instead of landing gracefully, he crashed hard on his back in front of a stunned crowd. The injury left lasting damage, and in the aftermath, his doctor prescribed Percodan. What started as treatment soon spiraled into a 13-year battle with addiction. The painkillers didn't just dull his chronic back pain, they fueled darker struggles with his mental health. Jerry's life became a cycle of physical setbacks and emotional turmoil. Alongside his injury, he lived with type 1 diabetes and endured multiple heart attacks, the first striking him in 1960 while filming Cinderfella. His dependency nearly cost him everything. In 1973, while under the influence of Percodan, he admitted he came close to ending his life, only stopping when he heard his children playing in the next room. Later, an